Hello, everyone. Today we're joined by Max Borders, who is the editor of the Foundation for Economic Education's publication, The Freeman, and the co-founder of Voice and Exit. Max, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so talk to us about Voice and Exit. What exactly is it?
That's the $60,000 question. Voice and exit. It really is. I don't want to pander to your audience, and yet I do. It really is a celebration for decentralizers. Honestly, like if there was any crowd I could say that to, and it makes sense, it's you guys. Really, our kind of mantra that we've gone with for a while is criticized by creating. And in order to do that, if you've ever been involved with any sort of open source movement or anything like that, you know you have to be able to fork. And forking in code, for example, means trying something new, opting out of a system in order to create a new one. Voice and Exit's ethos really is about exiting, in some sense, to try something new. So that's what it's about. In terms of just the substance of it, we have sort of these TED-like talks, we have breakout sessions, workshops, and then we have a big festival at the end with music and lights and all kinds of cool stuff. But ultimately, it is a celebration of decentralized thinking, or people who think about decentralization in the same way we do, whether that be cryptocurrencies, alternative systems of governance, like startup cities, seasteading, you name it, everything decentralization.
So Max, I'd love to explore kind of the ideological background of this a little more first before we launch into what concretely this event's going to be like. We've talked a little bit about the essay Voice, Exit, and Loyalty on the show before. I imagine obviously the name's derived a little bit from that. Can you tell us how you encountered that idea and what about it appeals to you and kind of made that an ideal foundation for this event?
You know, really, I have to give credit to a fellow named Arnold Kling, who first sort of set out the ideas in Exit, Voice, and Loyalty, the old Hirschman article, or the Hirschman book from, I think it's the 1970s. He did a follow-up in the 90s. But that human algorithm meant a lot to me. In terms of it being ideological, I would say yes and no. So there's a sense in which the Hirschman thing is more about this being a human algorithm. It's only ideological in the sense if we bring our ought to it, we bring our normativity to it. And I think we can, and I think we will with this sort of voice and exit ethos. But the first thing I think we have to do is sort of step back from it and say, so there are these forces at work in the world that Hirschman identifies. One is voice, expression, communicating our ideas, trying to persuade people within a system or within a group to go along our way, or to make change within that group through conversation, agitation, dialogue, and so on. But when that doesn't work, sometimes you have to strike out on your own. This is sort of the way humanity progresses. And when humanity does progress this way, you get kind of pluralism, kind of variety in different systems, and they're allowed to compete with each other. And then people will migrate among those systems to see which system is the best. Sometimes you have network effects that don't allow that to happen very readily or very easily, but certainly on a whole, I think human history has shown us that this pattern is at work for human beings, and particularly in this day and age with technology. I mean, you have an entire show devoted to these kinds of issues. So there is a transpartisan aspect or a post-political aspect to this that we want to bring out to say that's not ideological, that pluralism is a fact of life, and the non-ideological aspect of it is to say, hey, let people try different things, do different experiments, and let's see what happens. So there's no specific ideology, but there is a meta-ideology that you got to let the branching happen. You have to let the variety and the experimentation proceed, and that involves a kind of ought. So in that sense, there is, I guess, an ideological underpinning. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and as a follow-up to that, and you did give some, I think more vague, general examples, but do you have a specific example of someone exercising the right of exit, and what stands out to you as maybe the best example you can give of this theory?
You know, I hate to say this because it's probably just beaten to death on your show, but I mean, you know, when Satoshi Nakamoto started writing the code for the blockchain protocols, that is a fantastic example. And that exercise of exit is the most salient, at least in my mind, because there's so many ways you can exit using Bitcoin technologies, Bitcoin-associated technologies. So yeah, Bitcoin would be my first example. But let me give you another sort of less well-known example that might be interesting to your listeners and viewers. Back in the 80s, the British government really did control a lot of the airwaves, and you had to get licenses to broadcast radio. Well, there were people who liked punk rock and all kinds of stuff that the government considered subversive. So these cats went out on the ocean, you know, miles out where they could broadcast from the ocean in waters that were safe beyond the territorial limits of the British government, and they would broadcast back to shore, and there's really nothing that the British government could do. And of course, they were a big hit. But these are these little acts of exit that really help you know, people enjoy the kinds of human interactions they want to enjoy, you know, relatively free of the eyes and controls of territorial populations. So it doesn't always have to be technology-based, but in both cases, one was radio, and the first was Bitcoin. These technology is allowing people to do that to an extent that we haven't seen before in human history, and I think it's a pretty cool thing.
Max, can you expand on that a little bit, right? So you said it doesn't have to be sort of technological, but you know, from maybe I'm a technology maximalist, if you will. Like, I think that everything is eventually consumed by some sort of technology. Can you give two parts? Can you give an example of something that isn't technology based, right? Like radio is totally technology, and then give an example. I mean, what do you think is the role of technology as sort of like we as a society sort of increase its powers and capacity in this exit idea?
So this is going to sound this may sound stupid, and your listeners may. I would urge you to hold your tomatoes to the end of the set, right? But let me take one of my favorite examples. I love to drink butter coffee every morning. This is a recent fad. You know, people love drinking butter coffee, but really the background for butter coffee coming on. Okay, so by the way, this is it's technology only in the sense that it's a recipe. It's a very simple thing: butter plus coffee. There's a certain amount of bad juju associated with saturated fat, which butter is, right? So people eating bacon for breakfast again, people having butter coffee. This kind of sort of renewed interest in fat and fat-centric diet has come out of the paleo lifestyle. It doesn't matter if you like paleo lifestyle, if you subscribe to it or not. That's immaterial. Suffice it to say, though, there have been some really interesting things that have happened as a result of the paleo movement, of the evolutionary fitness movement that was set in motion by people like Arthur Devaney, who happened to be an economist, not a dietitian or a nutritionist. And you know, these folks really started becoming nodes in wider networks. Okay, so they were tech-enabled in the sense that they started, you know, communicating and blogging and sharing ideas in an environment that was made possible by internetworking, which we're doing right now. But the fact that they were doing this, having these network engagements and building these armies of people who were biohacking with a paleo lifestyle, was a very, very different thing than what the establishment experts in nutrition were used to seeing. Normally, you got a big degree in nutrition, you had to write articles for specific kinds of journals, and you were anointed as being a very special kind of person that was clean and fresh smelling in the eyes of the people who are nutritionists or who are physicians and so on. But when you network people and they experiment, they might be tinkerers, they might be makers, they might be doing all kinds of, biohacking, they might be trying diets, doing all kinds of things. When they start communicating, you get these sort of epiphenomena from the networks, that is, suddenly the expertise gets called into question. And I believe, had it not been for those networks forming around paleo diet, for example, or trying butter in their coffee, doing things like this that were really, really sort of against the status quo, right? When it came to diet and this kind of expertise, we would not have seen some of the big announcements we've seen recently that saturated fat is back. It's not as dangerous as we thought. Now there's even more stuff on salt. The paleos community was saying this all along. And really, the networks start to challenge the hierarchies of well-paid experts that kind of build guild structures around them. When you have a network going against it, you might not like what paleo has to say. And there might be networks of people who soon discover that the paleo people are doing something really stupid and unhealthy. And yet, what I want to point out, though, is that the network, the power of the network in these cases, has really given rise to challenging the hierarchies that are well established. They're cartelized around certain ideas and practices and sets of knowledge. When you have people who are, even if they're, I guess you could say amateurs, or they're brilliant people, but they're interested in it from the side or from outside their areas of expertise, but yet they're challenging, trying, experimenting different things, and connecting people, sharing information, this effect creates just new forms of information and new ways of having and sharing and upending knowledge sets. That's kind of a crazy roundabout example, but I hope that it answers your question, which is an example that is not particularly technological in butter coffee, with the network effect of people talking online.
So I think one of the most appealing things about exit as sort of a type of response rather than an ideology or a specific method is that it sort of springs from a kind of attitude, an attitude of exit versus kind of the attitude of voice. And I'm wondering, have you always been the kind of person who drinks butter in his coffee, or have you been sort of a voice person in the past? If so, how did that change for you? And if not, why would you say you've always had the kind of exit attitude?
I think both. I mean, I've been a sort of a. I think both in a lot of ways. I think we have to be selective. I'm not one who is, how should we say, an early adopter on certain kinds of things. So, for example, I had a fellow here in Austin. I live in Austin, so if any of your listeners are out there. Hi from Austin. We're experiencing lots of rains right now. But this fellow here in Austin, his name's Daniel Krawitz, came to me in about early 2011 and tried to get me to buy Bitcoin. And I didn't. I didn't buy any. I thought, oh man, this is cool, and I really want to do it. In fact, I would be willing to invest $500, maybe $1,000 in this just to see what it does, right? I didn't have much money at the time, but I really believed in the idea. And then it came to actually getting it, and it was like, at the time, like a 10-step process. And I'm a liberal arts guy. I'm a writer. I'm not going to go through all this stuff. So in that sense, I heard the voice, but in terms of making the switching costs for me were too high. So in the sense of being an early adopter, sometimes I just sort of wait around on the costs of exit to go down. I'm a real big voice person when it comes to stuff like startup cities in Honduras, the ZEEDS legislation that's happened there. I don't know if you guys know about that, but Honduras has passed a set of laws that will allow special economic zones there. That's a fantastic opportunity for human freedom and human flourishing, because the old laws are corrupt, and Honduras is a violent place and needs a lot of reform. So there's tremendous entrepreneurial opportunity to create a mini Hong Kong in Honduras. Would I go there tomorrow? Would I go out on a seastead tomorrow and start my own stuff? Probably not. So I kind of can be a cheerleader sometimes for some of this stuff. And yet I started my own little business here in Austin with this Voice and Exit event to really celebrate it. So it's a mix in one sense of voice and also of exit. Like I really wanted to try something new and entrepreneurial where I could figure out how to attract people to these ideas. I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, there are probably a handful of us in the world, but I wanted to be an exponent for this. So voice and exit for me really do kind of come in balance, and I think for most people they do as well. But I'm certainly much more unwilling. I'm less willing to die curious than most people, I think. And so if you look at the distribution of people over a curve, I'm probably much more on this end when it comes to trying new things. I like novelty.
And you mentioned a moment ago that you're a writer, and I wanted to know what part of the Voice and Exit event itself centers on artistic expression, and exactly why did you choose to include this?
Yeah, I think this is interesting because, well, first, a lot of credit goes to my partner, Seth Blaustein, my business partner, who is he's a filmmaker, so he has a fantastic visual sense. I like to think I do as well. So I love visual modality. I think human beings, we're evolved to most of us to, at least to see the world around us and to be delighted by beauty and wonder. We know it when we see it. That aesthetic sensibility is something that's sometimes lacking in these conferences. So we wanted to build that in. I think the other thing is that I like to go back to works of, Jung and Joseph Campbell and hell, even Star Wars, takes these archetypal landscapes and the hero's journey and uses them to tell different things. So we use narrative framing techniques to frame our speakers, for example. And the reason we want to do this is because human beings are, mythopoetic creatures. We like stories. We like rational arguments too, and particularly people who are in technology and certain kinds of fields of study that require that really logical, rational sort of linear type thinking. But we also wanted to couple with the arguments in the talks, a sense of the narrative, of telling stories, anecdotes, getting to the head through the heart, so that these kind of things are in balance. And so with Voice and Exit, we're really trying to do that. We're trying to create, a whole ethos around these ideas, and that requires using all the tools we have at our disposal. So yeah, if I want to bring my writer sensibilities, my artistic sensibilities to this, so does Seth, and I think our speakers do as well, and that as we improve and evolve is going to show up in the product.
That's fantastic. So talk to us a little bit about about Voice and Exit, like how many shows, how many events have you had, and maybe share some of the most interesting stories that you've had coming out of those events.
Yeah, the first year was really interesting from the standpoint of decentralization because it was before our, let's see, okay, totally interesting backstory here. Voice and Exit is funded by a person who is one of the richest people I've ever met, certainly, and I'm proud to call him an investor and a friend. But Chris Ruffer is his name. And he is, he is the CEO and founder of the largest tomato processor in the world. Now that sounds pretty unsexy, but let me tell you why this is a sexy organization. They don't have any managers in their company. The Morningstar Packing Company is a completely decentralized hive mind of a company. Employs thousands of people, many of whom are Spanish-speaking seasonal labor. The way they run this company is perhaps described as self-management or sort of internal anarchy, I guess you could say. I actually have a different term for it. It's maybe a stigmergic organization. but it's completely decentralized. So the first year, before, when we were putting together this event with bubble gum and shoelaces, just we had no money. 200 people came, and we were lucky to have them. We did manage to get one of the people from the Self-Management Institute to come out and talk to us about their management philosophy. And Paul Green Jr. in that first year, 2013, was one of those speakers. And he gives a great little introductory talk on how to create an organization that has no management hierarchy, where you have dynamic teams and where the mission is the boss, and where you really believe in the capability of human beings to sort of resolve their own conflicts and to really be entrepreneurs as much as they are entrepreneurs. I love this organization, and so it's interesting that later on Chris Rufer became our lead investor and a real believer in us, because this is a guy who's just wealthy beyond belief, but also very much I guess you could say a left brain thinker. So to try to convince him that all these other aspects I just described earlier were important was interesting. And so this motif of decentralization, from self-managed organizations to Jeffrey Tucker this year he's one of the major evangelists for Bitcoin, to seasteading, startup cities, you name it. These are the kinds of things we love to talk about, and having someone who can really put his money where his mouth is in terms of decentralization. Having him on our team is absolutely fantastic. Even if we fail with Voice and Exit, we'll fail forward, having learned so much from someone with a mind like Chris Rufer's. He's just a genius, really.
It seems like you're really putting together a really unique community here, with people like Paul Green, and you've had T.K. Coleman of Praxis speaking. You've had John Walpole of Emergent Order. It's a large community of creatives, entrepreneurs, intellectuals. My question is sort of what are your criteria when you look for these people? What is the common factor uniting all of them, and how do you see kind of the Voice and Exit-ness in them?
One way we do it is we have this community, and I would encourage you guys to join this. I don't often spill these kind of beans because there's a difference between our Facebook page, which is Voice and Exit, which anybody can find it, and we sort of just like pimp and promote our stuff through that channel. But we have a group, a private group called Voice and Exit 2 that existed before the event. And it was really a collection of intellectuals, thinkers, doers, entrepreneurs, people from all kinds of backgrounds who are thinking about this stuff. And some of them are just really fascinating people. And this was a place, I created this group just for us to be able to talk and share stuff we're working on. Whether it's sort of, I'm really interested in this political philosophy called polyarchy or panarchy, and when I was working on some of those early ideas, I shared that with the group, and other people will come. There's a guy named Tom W. Bell who spoke last year, who has this idea for open source law that he's working on for the startup cities in Central America, called ULEX, and the word plays on Unix, I think, or I think that's the wordplay. But in any case, an open source legal system, right? So we understand the open source protocols for code. So what if we applied that to law, where people can then take that open source code or set of protocols for law and apply it to different, more highly localized jurisdictions for their needs, so they can have the robustness of tested law, for example, the common law, but they can change things at the periphery and pick and choose as they need for their new jurisdictions. Fantastic stuff. But this is the kind of stuff that Tom is working on and working through in this group, and it just goes to show you another example of the kind of things that are made possible through networks. None of these people are in the, I mean, some of them are in the academy, but membership in the group does not require academic credentialing. And we welcome the diversity and the perspectives. I mean, people like John Popola here in Austin, he's a good friend of mine. The guy's a brilliant filmmaker. He is a creative guy, but he's also really, really extremely bright. And he helps people see things in ways that they might not otherwise have seen it, even if they have a lot of academic rigor. So we think, hey, mix it up, bring everybody together. Let's talk about these things and frame them in different ways. The more we iterate, the more these kind of ideas are going to get out, and the more we're going to hasten this sort of this revolution in how we create value in the world and how we make community.
So we'd really like to point our listeners to places where they can find ideas that they wouldn't necessarily be exposed to. After running these events and connecting so many people, what are some of the topics or spaces or industries, I don't know even what the categories would be even called here, where have some of the more unexpected insights come from as you run these events?
Well, it's sort of like this, you know, I don't know, let's see, these weird synchronicities happen. So there's a guy who, for example, in London, who works for a paper called City AM. And City AM is a business paper that is produced, and I think you can pick it up as you enter the London Underground and read it on the way to work. But he was connected with us, saw some of the things that we were doing, and he's now looking to establish an independently organized Voice and Exit in London. He will be there on June 20th and 21st for the event to check it out and see what's going on. But people who understand it, or who grok it and get inspired with this kind of ethos, just like you guys are, like once they do and once that community forms, there's so many synergies that start to take place, so many things, overlaps and interesting things that start to emerge without anybody having planned it, a la Emergent Order, right? So if this guy does this thing in London, that'll be one of those things. We've had people meet who had completely disconnected interests in seasteading and startup cities. They knew vaguely about each other, came to Voice and Exit last year. Now there'll be a big announcement as the president of Honduras will be joining Joe Quirk, our speaker last year from the Seasteading Institute, on stage at an event in San Francisco to announce a big thing that they're doing with the special economic zones down there. We connected Zachary Caceres with Michael Strong and Joe Quirk. They started talking independently of us, started talking in the group. All kinds of fantastic things are happening now. Now the president of Honduras is coming to the States since they met at Voice and Exit last year to announce this big thing that they've been working on ever since. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you can't believe it. Another just simple things like this year, Chris Roofer, the guy I was talking about, is our lead investor, and the guy who developed self-management, will be in the same room conducting a workshop with Brian Robertson of Holacracy One, another decentralized organization guru. He's coming out with a book next month. The two big gurus on self-management are going to be in the same room doing a workshop together because they admired what each other was doing and they said, hey, let's do it. So all these innocent people who kind of happen into the event because they wanted to see Ryan Holiday are going to have the opportunity to see these guys. If the guy's starting a startup, for example, this person who wanders in, the startup may be founded now on self-management, not hierarchical management. So we want to create the juju, the environment for these kind of unconventional ideas to be safely explored. I guess you could, a safe space for crazy ideas. It's absolutely happens all the time because people are just jazzed up and they're talking about this stuff. It is. I wouldn't be surprised if some kind of multi-million-dollar play spins out of this year's event, just because that's how people's juices get flowing when you start thinking about these kind of ideas.
It's really remarkable. I think we're seeing it too, that there's sort of we call it a decentralization movement, but it's not really a movement. It's sort of like a rebel alliance of exiting individuals. It's quite interesting to see the phenomenon. And I see something like Voice and Exit really playing a big role in providing that community for people and providing that focal point for really different people and ideas to converge, which is awesome. And we really, encourage our listeners to go check it out at voiceandexit.com. My question before we sort of wrap up here is, what are sort of your long-term visions and goals for Voice and Exit? What do you see this becoming in the next 5 years, say?
I really hope that we're able to, I know this is going to sound goofy, but decentralize a lot. There are two guys working on this. I'm an editor as well, and it's really tough for me to be able to do all this stuff. So there's personal bandwidth issues. There's also a lot of creativity out there. Someone listening to the show right now might say, you know what, I want to start my own Voice and Exit in Seattle. And we are currently developing the DNA for people to be able to do that. So when Mark Sidwell if he goes back and decides he wants to do one in London, he's going to have a lot of latitude. We're going to give some sort of basic DNA and branding specs. We will want to participate in the selection of speakers and that sort of thing, the basic optics, and so on. So you can have a little bit of brand projection that relates back to the mothership in a meaningful way. But really, in some ways, we've got to let go. We've got to decentralize in our operations for this thing to really flourish. We want it to be more like a slime mold than a couple of guys who are staying up late nights, trying to do it on the side, and really just let it take off. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's the 5-year Gosplan, right? Is to decentralize and grow.
That's a fantastic vision. It's pretty different from a lot of conferences. So, guys, what do you think? Should we host the Voice and Exit for the Google Hangout sphere? Because we pretty much live here, don't we?
As many hours as we spend, yes, absolutely.
So before we wrap up, Max, can you tell our listeners where they can find more about the event? Obviously, voiceandexit.com. Do you have any social media links for yourself, for the Freeman, or for the event that you'd like to point them toward?
I sure do, and at the risk of drinking from the fire, having them drink from the fire hose, I would say there's a Facebook page you can find us on Voice and Exit. I think the people who are in this group, if you're listening to this show, you would probably be a great addition to our private group. So if you have trouble finding that, please reach out to me at maxborders@gmail.com. I'm very happy to try to find you and add you to that group. The event if you want to come to the event, the more exiters, we call people who are into decentralization exiters, that we can get at this event, obviously the better off we are going to be solvent into the future. But I would very happily offer discounts to folks. If you use the code decentralize, you can get a copy of Brian Robertson's book on holacracy that's coming out next month, signed, a Voice and Exit t-shirt, and 20% off a ticket. Yeah, we definitely want more exiters there from around the country. It's a little tough now for folks to plan to travel with it being 3 to 4 weeks out, but if your folks think they can get here, we'll do everything we can to help them come and reduce the cost of their coming, because this is a really, really beautiful thing, and you've got to see it in person.
That's fantastic, Max. Thank you very much for your time today. A lot of very valuable insight. I'm sure our viewers will comment just the same. Max, thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Absolutely.